Channel 38, in cooperation with the Greater Chicago Sunday School Association, presents Adventures in Learning. The Bible will spring to life in this special series on archaeology. And now, here's your host on Adventures in Learning, Rose Van Reken.
Hello, and welcome to this new course of 13 lessons on archaeology and everyday life in Bible times. This is a program which is part of the Adventures in Learning series sponsored by the Greater Chicago Sunday School Association, and it's primarily geared to Sunday school teachers. But there are many lay Bible students who have developed an interest in the discovery of archaeologists. As their spades uncover cities, learn about customs, about the civilizations, about the cultures, about the problems and the everyday life of those people who lived in Bible times. I am myself not an archaeologist, but I have developed a great interest in that subject over the last 30 years. I have studied it, and I was so pleased when they asked me to share with you some of the things that I have learned. We have prepared a workbook, which you will be able to obtain at the end of the program. It will tell you how to get it. If you wonder what we're going to cover in this series, we're going to talk about how the archaeologist gets his information, what kinds of finds excite him and us, the importance of pottery, of seals, and of writing materials. And there will be 3 special lessons, one each on the Dead Sea Scrolls, Masada, and King Tut's tomb. During this course, we will use our Bibles. Archaeology cannot help us confirm the fact that this Bible is a revelation of God to man. It does not tell us that God sent his Son to save us. It does not tell us the way of salvation. Archaeology puts flesh and blood on the Bible people. It tells us where they lived, how they lived, what they ate, what work they did, that they were married and had children, lived and died, and that they were in their own civilization of their time, much as we are in ours. Much of what archaeology does, though, will substantiate the historical notes of the Bible, and it will also illuminate many of the passages. What really then is archaeology? Archaeology is the returning or the discovery of many items which are parts of man's past. These items may be large or small. They may be as big as an obelisk or a tunnel or an amphitheater or even as city walls. It could be medium-sized, like pools or graves, or the cornerstones or the foundation stones of houses, or the floors of synagogues. They could be very small. They could be small like clay pots, tools, weapons. They could be coins, jewelry, all of these things which give us a glimpse of the way that people lived in ancient times. About 100 years ago, there were no rules for archaeologists to follow. A man could take anything that he found from a country in the Middle East and bring it back to America or to his home country. No matter what size it was, if he had the money and the ambition and the ability to bring it back, he could do that. But now there are rules that archaeologists follow, and this makes it much more scientific today. The items that they find are of interest to all people, and especially to those, like I am, a Bible student. How are these things found? They are found in many ways, sometimes accidental. Let me tell you about a few of the accidental discoveries. First, there was this man in Damascus who, in 1951, was digging a sewer in his backyard. When he dug down a few feet, his spade hit what looked like bricks put together with mortar. And after he had dug a little more, he knew that he had to go to the Department of Antiquities in his city to tell them what he had found. They sent a man out to investigate and decided that there should be an archaeological team in his backyard that summer to see what it was that he had hit. They worked those months, and do you know what it was that they had found? Do you know what it was that that man's spade had hit? It was the top of a 17-foot arch. It had been built long ago, but it had been covered with dirt all through the centuries. And in these 1900s, nobody knew that that arch was under the ground. Let me give you another example. There was a man in Amman who was working in his backyard in order that he might prepare soil for a garden. And when his spade went into the earth, it touched a mosaic. He went to the Department of Antiquities, which is exactly what everybody has to do who finds something man-made in the Middle East. And they decided to ask Dr. Van Elderen to come, he's a man from Calvin Seminary, to come with his archaeological team to dig for that summer. What they found was the floor of a 6th century Byzantine church. Beautiful mosaic. And when Dr. Van Elderen had worked on this thing all summer, he said to his men, perhaps there might be foundations and other parts of this church that we would be able to find. Let's come back next year and see what we can find. In the meantime, cover this whole floor with the canvas. So the men were going to dig holes to put the posts in to hold up the canvas. When after they went down about 3 inches for those post holes, they found another mosaic floor. The new floor covered the old one. Now that shows you one of the problems of archaeologists. They can't take away and see what the old floor is like because the new floor would be destroyed. And oftentimes there's no way to keep the top layer intact when you want to look at a bottom layer. I'd like to show you a few pictures that Dr. Van Elderen gave to me so that you would understand what this mosaic floor looked like. Here is 5 feet below the surface was this beautiful 30 by 13.5 foot floor, half of which was preserved. Every day it was exciting for them as they uncovered more and more with careful and painstaking effort of the design and color of this beautiful floor. Inside of the border, there's a continuous flow of grapevines with the leaves and the fruit placed in very colorful, delicate frames for the people or the birds or the animals which are featured. This deer is shaped perfectly to be comfortably placed within the circle of the vine which surrounds it. Yet the absolute rigidity of the circle is broken, as you can see, by both the horns and by the feet. You'll notice that in a good mosaic, every piece is set at a slightly different angle in order to reflect the light to the beholder with the degree of brilliance that the artist intended. It's interesting to notice, too, the expression that's obtained by the placement of the cubes in the eyes. This horse almost seems to be smiling, and the colors are well preserved. The green on his back. Sometimes it's hard to imagine that a floor like this was made 1,300 years ago. Here is a close-up of a camel. You'll notice that he has a tether or a rope tied to him, which is attached also to the handler who is pulling this camel. None of the figures are in any way crowded or distorted because of lack of space or poor planning. Here we see the back of the camel and the saddle. Attached to that saddle, there is also a tether because camels traveled in caravans and were always roped to each other. The border did not have vines and flowers and grapes, but it had flowers and leaves, as you see in this particular instance. There was writing on different spots in this synagogue floor, and it showed that the church was named after or dedicated to Thomas, a bishop. Bird on the border. The leaves you can see are made again with different styles, different shapes, and different sized mosaics. Here's a very interesting and intricate design. If you follow the circles or the squares, you can see how many patterns are interwoven into this one design. There really were no religious motifs at all on this floor. The art depicted everyday life and activities in the church, rather than any heavy theological themes or even any biblical scenes. In order to see that floor, we had to get a key from the Department of Antiquities. The floor is now surrounded by a wall, and when we came near to the place, the young man quickly got a pail of water and a rag to wipe clean some of the mosaic. Now, you can see on this picture that we took, he did not wipe it completely clean, but we took it anyway because it shows a space on the right side where you can see the mosaic of the floor below. That mosaic was much, much plainer. In fact, it reminded us of this mosaic, which we had seen on the synagogue floor in Masada, which was built centuries earlier. We asked Dr. Van Elderen, why do you suppose that a person or a church would want to make a new floor when they had a perfectly serviceable old one? And Dr. Van Elderen told us that most likely it was just like a woman who had a kitchen floor, which was serviceable, and still she wanted to have a new floor, which would be more modern, something which would be easier to clean, and which might depict something that she wanted to show, just as this floor did. And therefore, the artwork that Dr. Van Elderen found does tell us a little bit about the way the people lived in early Christianity. And now for a third example of an accidental discovery. John Trevor was a young man of 32. He lived in Jerusalem. He was attending the American School of Oriental Research. It was February 18, 1948. It was 4:30 in the afternoon when his cook, Omar, told him that there was a telephone call waiting for him. Someone wanted to know something about some old manuscripts. So when he answered the phone, he found that it was a man from the Syrian Orthodox monastery, a monastery of St. Mark's, which was in the old city of Jerusalem. The man was a librarian, and what he said to John Trevor was this: I have here some old books. They are rare, and I would like to make a catalog of them. Since I'm librarian, I really need some information, and I have some old manuscripts. They've been in this monastery for 40 years. Could you help me identify them so I'd have some material to put into the catalog? Well, John Trevor had worked with manuscripts. He thought perhaps he would be able to do this. Are they very old, he asked. We think so, said the librarian. Now, this was at the time when Jerusalem was still divided. Palestine was on the western side, and the east was Jordanian. And there was not much passage between the two. But John knew that this particular librarian would be able to come through because he was dressed in the garb of the Christian clergy. So he said to him, could you bring those to me tomorrow, maybe at about 2:30? The arrangements were made. At 2:30 the next day, this librarian came to John Trevor's office. And he said he carried with him a leather case. And suddenly he opened the case and he took from it a scroll. The scroll was about 2 inches in diameter, and it was about 6 inches long. It was cream colored. It had clear Hebrew script. He unfolded it carefully. It was quite brittle. And he could see that it was a different writing from anything that he knew. But before he could examine it anymore, the man took another scroll from his case, and this one was large. It was about 10.5 inches and 6 inches in circumference. It was much more pliable. It was softer leather, and it was very large. So John took it and put it out on his bed and unrolled it. It was 23 feet long. He could not believe it. And when he looked at it, He did not recognize the writing. And so he thought, I must look back at something else. I have some slides. I will check to see if by any chance they match any of this writing. So first he got a British codex, a very old British codex slide, and he looked at it. No, it was not the same writing. Then he remembered Nash papyrus, which Albright had said was to be dated back to the 1st century BC. This contained the 10 Commandments and Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. And he looked at the Nash papyrus and he examined that slide with the writing that he saw on the bed. And suddenly he realized that some of the letters were exactly the same. His heart began to pound. He did not want that the librarian should know that this could be so very old, because then he might keep it. He might prevent John from seeing any more of it. He might not give him any more if he had them. So he wondered, could he maybe take a picture? And the man said, you can. But then John remembered his camera was at school. So very carefully he copied one verse, just one verse. And then the librarian rolled the scroll back up, and he said he would come back some other day for John to take pictures. John went back to a friend of his, and the two of them examined the verse, and they found that it was part of Isaiah, Isaiah 65, verse 1. And was he excited? In fact, the excitement that came from that particular thing has just gone through the whole Christian world of scholarship, because what he had put his hands on that day was the Isaiah scroll that belonged to the Dead Sea Scrolls. They had been found where? They had been found in the caves near the Dead Sea. Were they as old as he had said? No, they were not. But he did not want, the librarian did not want to tell John Trevor where they were from. And so he had said they kept them for 40 years in the monastery. So that was the beginning of this beautiful Dead Sea Scroll episode. I want to show you just a few slides of the area where these scrolls were found. These are the Judean hills on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea where the scrolls were found. They are filled with caves. This is a picture of cave number 4, in which some of the scrolls were found. Here are jars. These jars were quite large, some were broken, and they contained the scrolls and kept them for all these years. Here is the Isaiah scroll. And now, if you were to go to Jerusalem, you would find that all these scrolls, the artifacts, and other things that were found in the Dead Sea are put into a building which has a roof that looks like the cover of a Dead Sea Scroll. It's very beautiful, and you can go and examine many of the things that they found. I do plan to do a program on Dead Sea Scrolls when I will tell you much more about them. But for the time being, let me show you what one of the jars looks like. It's a little miniature Dead Sea Scroll jar. It has the cap, it has the color of the original Dead Sea Scroll jars. So one of these days, I will be giving you a program on the Dead Sea Scroll. Now I would like to tell you about one more place today, and this is the city called Caesarea. Caesarea is a place that's about 65 miles north of Jerusalem. If we were to draw the map, we would draw something like this, little bump here. Here we would have the Sea of Galilee. Here we would have the Dead Sea and the Jordan River flowing down in between. On this part about over here, we have Caesarea. Here's Joppa, and down lower we would find Azotus, and still farther is Gaza. The reason I tell you that is because Caesarea maybe means to you Philip. And Philip is the man, you remember, who was told by the Lord to go on the way to Gaza to meet the Ethiopian eunuch, and he spoke to him. And remember that he believed on the Lord Jesus. And then we read that Philip went through Azotus And he went on his way on preaching on all the cities until he came to Caesarea. Caesarea is also the place where Cornelius lived. Cornelius was the Roman centurion, the centurion who had God told him to go to Peter when Peter was in Joppa. And he said, tell Peter to come to you because he has a message for you. And you remember that same day that Peter had the vision at noontime of a sheet descending, and he didn't know what it all meant, all the unclean animals, until the Lord told him, and he realized that I must go with Cornelius. I must tell him the message. So he went with Cornelius. Where to? To Caesarea, because that's where Cornelius lived. And when Cornelius had all his friends and relatives gathered together and Peter told them the story of the Lord, they believed. The Holy Spirit fell upon them. They spoke in tongues. And you remember that they knew this as the first outpouring of the Spirit upon the Gentile people. That happened in Caesarea. Pilate lived in Caesarea. Herod lived in Caesarea. Paul was taken to Caesarea one night from Damascus when the people were plotting against his life. And another time, Lysias sent Paul to Caesarea from Jerusalem so that he could see Felix. And it was while he was with Felix that he had to stay in prison for 2 years. And then you remember that later on he spoke to Agrippa, and he spoke to Felix, and he spoke to Festus, and then they sent him on his way to Rome. All that happened at this Caesarea. This is not Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is up north of the Sea of Galilee. But Caesarea on the sea is the city we're talking about. How did this city get started? Herod built it. Herod the Great, the one who killed all the boy babies of Bethlehem. For 12 years, he worked on this city. There had been no city there before, but he wanted a harbor, and he wanted a beautiful city to name after Tiberius Caesar. And so after Augustus Caesar, I'm sorry. And so he built a city of 164 acres. It had gorgeous buildings, limestone, white marble. It had amphitheaters. It had palaces. It had temples. Everything that could be beautiful was found in the city of Caesarea. In fact, since 1970, there have been a continuous group of volunteers who have been digging in Caesarea, and they have found many, many things. I want to show you just a few things on the slide that were found by the archaeologists in this tremendous city. Let's look at some slides. Here is an aqueduct. This aqueduct brought water into Caesarea from 10 miles away. The spring is in the mountains. For 6.5 miles, there's a tunnel in the mountains, and then these arches carry 3 aqueducts to the city of Caesarea so they could have water. The arches, and this is one of the arches, shows you, when you look through it, how close we are to the Mediterranean. And this is a close-up of the arch. These arches carried the aqueduct. And here's a picture again of the aqueduct so that you may see that only this end of the aqueduct has been excavated. The rest is still all covered by sand. This is one of the buildings of the Crusaders. And here we see an amphitheater. This amphitheater was completely filled in, completely covered up. And they had to take out all the material, and it looked very rough when we first saw it, but you should see it today. It has been renovated, and right now there's room for 4,000 people to sit in this beautiful amphitheater. The seats are all numbered, and programs are given here. The acoustics in an amphitheater are fantastic. The Mediterranean is in the background. The platform is in the middle of the picture, and the Israeli Philharmonic gives concerts here. In fact, once when we were at an amphitheater, a woman told us to go to the top step, which we did. She stood on the platform and she just sighed, and the sigh was enough for us to hear way on the top step. That's how excellent the acoustics are. And all the seats are built and rebuilt and just beautiful for concerts or for any other programs. Not far, we found this foot of a statue, and there is a pencil alongside it to show you how enormous this is, but only the foot is left. Here we have the base of a pillar, and I want to tell you that the people who are now there have uncovered a street that's a mile long. It's 18 feet wide, and it goes all the way from the amphitheater down with they were lined, the street was lined with columns. There were 700 columns that lined it, and this could have been the base of one of the columns. And he built a harbor. The only harbor then that was where the ships were able to come in on the Mediterranean to get out of the storms and the winds was at this beautiful harbor that Herod built at Caesarea. Here is a stone, which you can hardly read it, but it says Tiberius Pilatus. In other words, this is a stone which was used to replace one of the broken spots in the amphitheater, one of the seats. And when they looked at it, they found that Pilatus' name along with Tiberius, and it showed that Tiberius Caesar and Pontius Pilate truly lived at the same time, as the Gospels have always said. Next time, we hope to tell you something about tells. Tells are the places where most of the items that archaeologists find are located. And we'll give you a description of them and explain to you what they are and how the archaeologists work in them. We'll be looking forward to seeing you at that time.